It never rains, but it pours in the latest PPC saga. Monday's general meeting has been cancelled. The executives have stepped down. This is Tonight. I am Bruce Whitfield, and tonight we dig deeper into the whole saga. We look at what it means for corporate governance, for shareholders, and what it means for the way in which governance is conducted. There are massive corporate governance issues, there are ethical issues as well. Joining me is Cynthia Schoeman, Managing Director of EthicsMonitor, and Byron Lotter, who's a portfolio manager at Vestact Asset Management. 3 months, a bunch of value, Byron Lotter, has been destroyed. Have we worked out just how much money has been wiped off the value of PPC in the last 3 months?
Well, I think the share price was around 33 Rand, and it's trading at around 25 Rand. Yeah. So percentage-wise, we're looking at 30%. I think there certainly are underlying issues there. I think PPC in general, before we even talk about corporate governance and what's happening on top, is under a lot of pressure. Their balance sheet's under pressure.
It's got a pile of debt the size of Table Mountain, and it's got very expensive acquisitions, which is yet to bring to book across the African continent. Sure, that may be the growth opportunity of the future, but these could be 20-year projects.
And a lot of their long-term shareholders are used to nice strong dividend yield, and they fall within a lot of dividend type indices, so that dividend's going to start coming back, and I think a lot of these long-term patient shareholders might start becoming impatient.
Okay, well, what we've seen today, Cynthia, is a big announcement out of PPC. Essentially, Ketso Gordon, you're out. You're not coming back. There is no way. The door has been slammed in your face. Becky Sibia says, I'll stick around up until the new board is constituted and everything's on an even keel. I will then step away. Trifosa Romano, the finance director at the center of this, she's the woman that Ketso Gordon wanted to exit the business. He wanted to fire her, basically. He didn't like her very much. She's been kicked off the board, and she will work within the business of PPC as chief financial officer. And Paul Staver, who had teamed up with Ketso Gordon, has also been told, because there's a clever little clause in the statement that says nobody who's been an executive in the last 10 years can get their jobs back. So they've dotted every I and crossed every T, I suspect.
I certainly think you're right. On paper and in terms of the process as we've seen it unfold, in theory, this has all been done tick box correct.
Finally, after 3 months of complete and utter chaos.
Exactly, and hammering the share price, among other things. But for me, it really warrants a look underneath that to say, okay, superficially, everything appears to be correct. What then is the ethical issue here? What is the governance issue that needs to be explored here? And for me, there are a couple of issues here. The whole area around conflict of interest, if we're looking at, a director, which means the board and the former CEO should be acting in the best interests of the company. If they don't, by definition, it's a conflict of interest.
However, I, as the chief executive, may think I'm the only one acting in the best interest of the company, and the rest of you idiots on this board don't have a clue what you're doing, which is essentially what Ketso Gordon was on about.
Well, for me, the issue is, yes, for me, the issue is that there warrants being transparency around this issue, because the board and Ketso Gordon have taken quite a different view, hence the board disagreement, on two big issues. One is whether the CEO was permitted to in fact fire the person, and here we're talking to limitation of authority. Now we can go off another track down there, but actually that should be clear. And the answer to that would in fact dictate whether the board has overstepped the mark and in fact been spectacularly non-supportive, or whether the CEO didn't have that mandate in the first place. And then that again, that transparency would lead us as observers or shareholders to be able to say, was that disagreement between Ketso Gordon and the CFO, was that personal? Or was it genuinely about the best interests of the company? But we don't have those questions answered.
Does it matter anymore, Byron? The deed is done.
Well, the deed is done, and I think we do have certain details as to why they fell out. I mean, the big issue was a certain funding agreement that they apparently had, and it was messed up. by the CFO. And
But that was the allegation. Ketso Gordon's
that was the allegation.
was
Yes.
Trafosa Romano stood in his way when it came to a lucrative funding arrangement from non-bank sources.
Which was extremely important for a certain acquisition going forward into, I think it was in Ethiopia. What Ketso did, where he made the mistake is, I think he got a bit hot-headed and he immediately resigned and announced it, and then he thought, well, actually I've made a mistake.
Well, the trouble is he resigned not once but twice. He did storm out of a previous board meeting, say, I quit! And left, and so they sent somebody else to cool him down. He came back in again, and everybody kissed and made up.
And he actually had the backing of 50% of the board even after he resigned. But then while they were busy discussing whether they'd allow him to come back, he brought legal action against the whole board. So he made quite a few enemies there, shot himself in the foot. And unfortunately, it's at the end of the day, the shareholders that make the decisions in these businesses. The board had the backing of the shareholders, and that's why they've been able to get rid of him completely now.
Has PPC behaved ethically, Cynthia, in this particular matter? Because the meeting was called for the 8th, for next week, and it was all going to be out in the open, and there was going to be a public discussion. Now the board has done a deal with 3 big shareholders. It is Ford,
Nedbank,
and Nedbank and Visio. Those are the 3 shareholders, 10%, maybe 15% of shares. They've done the deal with those 3, and the meeting is called off.
Yes.
Is that the right way to have handled it? Or should they have had the meeting and taken the dirty laundry and really pegged it up for all of us to see?
Well, you can look at it under a banner of dirty laundry, but I would also raise the point again of transparency. I think in terms of ethical conduct, getting those minority shareholders to agree to this way forward, I think is perfectly ethical.
Okay.
One can't claim it's unethical.
No.
But as I say, what I'm raising is that in that process, yes, there was that particular issue between Romano and Gordon, but in fact his claim extended way beyond that in terms of her setting obstacles to the implementation of the strategy. The board disagreement itself has been certainly unprofessionally handled, in which case I would look to the chair. And as I say, that lack of transparency doesn't answer the question around what is in the best interests of the company, which directors were and weren't acting in the best interests of the company. And the other key issue of the Companies Act that is very pertinent from an ethical point of view is, did the various players involved, including the board, act in terms of the proper use of their power? And I think that hasn't been clarified at all.
Okay, so I mean, we got all of these issues. It then comes together with a reconstituted board. That'll happen at the end of January next year, when the board will have 12 non-executive directors.
Yes.
Now, that's feasible, I suppose, but nonsensical, isn't it? To have 12 non-executive directors as the board. You've got to have executives on the board. Surely governance dictates that.
Indeed. And it's also sensible in terms of running the business appropriately. But there was a much smaller announcement elsewhere saying that once the new CEO had been appointed, in fact, then it would be deemed appropriate to select executive members.
And then the new CEO could say whether or not they would want the finance director, the chief financial officer, back on the board.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
This looks like a fairly elegant game of chess that is being played.
Well, I don't think she can go back on the board because she has been an executive, and that is
the tenure rule precludes her.
So what the new CEO coming in can do is decide whether he's willing to work with her or not, because obviously Ketso had, or what he made out to be very valid reasons, and she was stifling the progress of the business, and if the incoming CEO feels the same, then he has the right or the power to essentially get rid of her.
Or she.
Indeed.
Or she. Sorry.
There we go. Just
Apologies.
checking,
Apologies.
Somebody's got to keep you in check.
But there's another element to this, and I mentioned this off air earlier, is that the Black Business Council came forward now saying that the proposed board members by those shareholders...
Amongst them, Bobby Gotzel is on the list,
Yes.
and we know Bobby Gotzel skriks for nix. He's not frightened.
Apparently there's way too many white faces on that proposed board.
The Black Business Council, isn't that connected somehow to Trafosa Romano, though?
Well, she's the chair lady of the Black Business Council.
Oh, my word, okay. Okay, so the council is coming out and batting for its chair, who happens to be the finance director of PPC, and on the boards, interestingly enough, of about 4 or 5 other companies. We've invited her onto the show today, but she's getting married apparently and couldn't make it. How many finance directors are on multiple boards? It doesn't strike me as particularly common. Surely, if you're the finance
Maria
director,
Ramos is on the board of Richmond,
which is unusual in the banking sector.
Yeah.
Banking chief executives tend to be only on the board and subsidiary boards of the companies they represent. Maria is unusual in the banking sector, but not many FDs are on multiple boards. Maybe she's
it's
very
a very
talented.
time-consuming job. I think you would want 100% of your time and effort in the business that you executively involved in.
And certainly if you're not willing to take a pay cut, as executives at PPC were asked to do. Was it reasonable of Ketso Gordon, was it ethical of Ketso Gordon to pick a fight with Trifosa Romano? Clearly, we don't know where the first fight was and which order things happened, but he got a bit grumpy with her about saying she refused to relinquish the office. She wanted the nice parking space, and she also wasn't prepared to take the pay cut, which was part of his big strategy to try and reduce the pay gap within the organization. At high level, massively ethical, but was it appropriate for him to try and force her hand to take the pay cut?
I think that has to be by agreement. One cannot, even in terms of the law, force someone to take a pay cut, so that by agreement. You could argue that in terms of creating a more ethical organization with a lesser gap between employees and executives, he scored a great coup there, especially with the sensitivity around executive remuneration. But again, I think that we have his side of the story as regards that disagreement, and I don't think we have a clear issue whether he was acting personally out of her having behaved poorly when she didn't get his position that she applied for, and whether he's perfectly valid or not.
Does he ever get a job in the private sector again, Byron Lotter?
I'm sure he will. It's going to be interesting to see what he does with his PPC shares. I mean, at one stage they were worth.
He refused. He said,
$40
if I'm not in charge, I'm not holding on to these
Well,
things.
fair enough.
How long does he hold on to them, though? $25 when he had
Well,
them at
maybe
33?
he's been selling today after he got that news, because he released a short statement saying that he was actually quite happy with what's happened, and that essentially he wants a new board, and he's getting 6 new members, and that's as far as he's going to be able to go, and he has made some kind of change.
Yeah, does anybody emerge well out of this one, Cynthia?
I don't think so. I think that if one backs up in terms of that question and says, yes, there was a board disagreement, taking it public, was that really the right option?
It may not have been, but it's been fantastic to watch. Cynthia Schoeman, Managing Director of EthicsMonitor. She's going to have words with me for that comment afterwards, no doubt. And Byron Lotter, who's a portfolio manager at Vestact. Thank you so much for watching this evening. Does this draw a line finally under the whole PPC saga, or does the new year bring many more adventures as the new board is constituted, as the Black Business Council then decides to pick a fight with PPC over their chairperson, Trifosa Romano, being removed from the board and into the CFO role? Does she stay there? Does she choose to relinquish some of the additional board seats that she has? Trifosa Romano, the invitation remains open. We'd love to talk to you on Tonight with Bruce Whitfield. Till next time, bye-bye.